Good people of the Grove. Hey, growth groups, once again, we're back to back. If you missed last week, this week won't make much sense if you don't make sense of last week first. The reason why is because today is 2 Samuel chapters 13, 14, and 15, and they are directly related to chapters 11 and 12 when David committed all the sin with Bathsheba and had Uriah killed. And of course, Nathan confronts him and ultimately pronounces judgment on the house of David. And today are all those judgments coming to fruition pretty quickly here, at least in the narrative. What we'll find in chapters 13, 14, and 15 is it is exactly that. God's judgment upon the house of David, as ultimately all the things that God says was going to happen start to happen here pretty quick, right? Chapter 13, right? Let's just summarize these three chapters and then we'll get into our questions. The summary basically is this, right? Absalom takes vengeance on Amnon, who raped his half-sister Tamar. Tamar and Absalom were full brother and sister. Amnon was a half-brother of Tamar, and he loved her / lusted after her, had to have her, and manipulated her into caring for him. And when she got close, he pounced on her and did the unthinkable. And what you see ultimately is that 2 years go by, David does nothing, and Absalom takes matters into his own hands, and he kills Amnon and basically flees. Pretty terrible all around. We go into 14, and you see Absalom in exile, and Joab orchestrates this whole thing with this woman that goes to try and manipulate King David to bring Absalom back in, and of course David falls for it, and he sees, he's into parables these days. Nathan tells him a parable, the woman tells him a parable, and his heart is open to reconciliation. He's open to bringing Absalom back in, but only so far. He doesn't give him access to the throne. He doesn't see Absalom for 2 years after this kind of whole deal works out with Joab and this woman. So Absalom gets back into Jerusalem, and for 2 years he doesn't see his father David, the king, and he gets impatient, and he starts to reach out to Joab to try and find a way to get to the throne room with David, and Joab does not answer, and he sets Joab's fields on fire so that Joab will come and seek an audience with Absalom, and then eventually David on Absalom's behalf. Crazy stuff. What you're going to find is that David is not real attentive to the issues that are going on in his own family within the kingdom of Israel. And Absalom continues to get impatient. And really, it's the generational sin that's trickling down from David into his sons and daughters, and Absalom and Tamar and Amnon. Just terrible things that are happening ultimately. And as that unfolds, you're seeing Absalom getting impatient, executing his own idea of justice, and doing things his own way. All right, that gives way to chapter 15, where Absalom wins the people's heart. He manipulates the people's heart by going to the gate of the city. At the gate of the city is where they would do business. And ultimately, the people of Israel, instead of seeking the audience with the king, Absalom kind of intercepts people, and he says, hey, look, he doesn't have really time for you, but I do. And I don't know if you know this, but I'm really handsome, and I'm really kind, and I'll give you what you need. And so he wins the people over for, again, 2, or I think it's 4, I don't remember, a good period of time, where ultimately, right, he is winning the people's hearts by giving them what they want in judgments, in legal matters. He is handsome, as it says in chapter 15. He wins enough friends and enough favor with God's people that he stages a coup with David, and David ends up fleeing Jerusalem. He doesn't want to have any part of the conflict, while also seating Absalom's court with some friends to be able to hear and see and spy on exactly what Absalom's plans are. So those are the summaries, right? These are the big ideas as to what's happening in these chapters 13, 14, and 15. And now as we get closer, ultimately, we're seeing, I think, the biggest question that we have of all is right here. What do these chapters reveal about God? I think this is the biggest question of all. And I'm just going to give one big, what does this reveal about God out of these 3 chapters? Here's the question. Where is God when our darkest hour meets us? I think that's behind all these questions, all these chapters. Where is God? Is he absent? See, that's what some might think is being revealed about God in these chapters, that with Amnon raping Tamar in particular. Where's God in that moment? The hard one. It's a hard one in our own lives, much less to read it on a page. That's tough. Where is God when we're busy conspiring and manipulating and abusing one another? This seems to be the overarching question in these chapters. But rest assured, friends, that ultimately God is not passive. He is active in the care of his people, even in the midst of such tragedy. We live in a fallen world. It is broken, and we have depraved hearts, and that's going to come out as we continue to answer these questions. So some might say he's absent. I don't think that. After all, you see God working in the background of doing exactly what he said he would do. I would say he's faithful, and it's going to sound terrible to say that, but I always say that because he is faithful to execute the judgments that he promised just one chapter before. He is executing his judgments exactly as he said through Nathan the prophet to David, that there would be division in your home, that your wives would be taken by others, by their neighbors, and ultimately there would be death that would continue to be in David's household. So I think that's a great summary statement as to what we see about who God is in these chapters. And he's paying back, like he is bringing recompense. He is bringing judgment upon Absalom, upon Amnon, in the midst of such chaos. So God now is letting his judgment flow from chapters 12 and 11 out in real time as we read it. All right. What does this reveal about us as humans? Well, I think I'll try to break this down 13, 14, and 15 because I think it's a little bit more detailed there as far as what it reveals to us. So I'll just do all of them. Chapter 13, it's pretty obvious. Our depravity is on full display in chapter 13. It was on display in 11 when David did his thing. Now it's really on display with Amnon and Tamar. It is his half-sister that he violates and he lays with, and he quote-unquote takes her. Our depravity is on full display in this chapter, especially in regards to generational sin. As sin gets carried down from one generation to the next, God, of course, said that this would happen, that he would the sin of our fathers would visit to the third and fourth generation. We might think that's unfair. It's actually a mercy. And you see this playing out in your families. If your dad was angry, or your mom was angry, or an alcoholic, or whatever it may have been, or abusive, you are fighting against that. Your kids will likely have some of that in them. But by the time it gets to their kids, man, whatever sin was happening with your dad or your mom, it's likely not even going to be a thing by the third and fourth generation. And so though there is punishment, there is consequence to the third and fourth generation, God's mercy reigns for all generations. So let's remember that as we go through. But there it is. It's on display with incest, manipulation, and lust, and murder, all coming to the forefront here in David's home in chapter 11, chapter 13. This is in our hearts. Chapter 14. I think that what chapter 14 reveals about the heart of humanity is that we are suckers for charismatic, handsome, or beautiful leadership. We've said this before with Saul, but now it's coming back to fruition with Absalom. It's kind of interesting that some of the things that were said about Saul were also said about Absalom. Very handsome from head to toe. Everyone looked at him and was like, man, this guy doesn't have any faults. Anyways, we are suckers for handsome, charismatic, winsome leaders. Absalom was handsome. He had no blemish from head to toe. But it reminded me of a proverb, kind of this random proverb, really, but it's Proverbs 26:23, and it says this: like the glaze covering an earthen vessel are fervent lips with an evil heart. All right, you're going to have to get through, maybe the New Living or the NIV or something that gives you some understanding as to what's being said there. Like the glaze covering an earthen, like it looks good. It's shiny on an earthen vessel, are fervent lips, flattering lips that conceal an evil heart. In other words, those that are charismatic, those that are really smooth talkers, you go and do a word search on the word smooth in the book of Proverbs, smooth lips, flattering lips, and it's always typically referring to the adulteress or an enemy. And it's kind of interesting that we value that kind of thing rather than someone who comes face to face and speaks the truth in love to you. So in other words, flattering lips make the outside look good, but the inside is evil. And I think that is certainly something that we are prone to. As the people of Israel were prone to give in to Absalom. All right, chapter 15. What does it reveal about us? Well, look, where there's a lack of justice in the land, David didn't execute justice really on any level through these chapters. Where there is a lack of justice in the land, the people, Absalom or others, will fill that gap, that vacuum, with their own idea of justice. David had not punished Amnon, so Absalom kills him after 2 years. After 2 more years, he returns to Jerusalem. He can't see the king. The David won't see him. And after 4 years of winning the people's heart at the gate, he puts a plan into motion to basically shoo David away from Jerusalem. When we abdicate our responsibility as leaders, just as David did, someone else will fill in the gap with their own version of leadership that is typically not anointed or given by God, but is kind of their best guess at what needs to get done. And it's typically going to be a mess. We as leaders need to step in and never abdicate our responsibility to execute justice upon the earth in whatever responsibility and area that we have. All right, what is this? Now, what must we do? All right. 3 simple things out of these 3 chapters. I'll try to be quick. Chapter 13 is pretty clear. Lust of the eyes is really gaining traction in Amnon's heart, and even in Absalom's. Like, he wants to kill Amnon, and he's ready for it. Like, that's a lust of some sort. But you got to remember the difference between lust and love. Lust is selfish. Love is selfless. Lust destroys. Love builds up. Lust kills. Love gives life. So I would ask the question as you consider what God wants you to do out of chapter 13. Where are you in your battle, in the victory that you've proclaimed or that you are living in? Where are you in your battle and your struggle and your fight against the lust of the flesh? For Amnon, it overtook him. He got bad counsel along the way, the same bad counsel that was sneaking in with David. You can find friends to help you appeal to the lust of your flesh. So if you're a student, you're going to find friends that will help you live an easier life or more popular life, one that doesn't stick out so much for Jesus. But remember, our God is calling us to live a life of love, of selflessness, of self-denial, not one of self-gratification. Lust or love, which one will drive you? That's chapter 13. Chapter 14, you see at the end of chapter 14 in verse 33, this is what the Bible says. It says, just kidding. Is it at the end of chapter 14? It is, right here. Then Joab went to the king and told him, and he summoned Absalom. Absalom had come back to Jerusalem. David is now with Absalom for the first time in 2 years. So he came to the king and bowed himself on the face of the ground before the king. And the king, that is David, kissed his son Absalom. Now you remember, Absalom is still ready to connive and manipulate and even kill David, could be. And David responds with kissing. I don't know who you need to kiss instead of kill, who you need to reach out to that might be declared your enemy, who you need to forgive instead of hold enmity and bitterness towards. But we must be a people that pursue quote unquote kisses instead of killing, forgiveness instead of retribution. That's what Jesus calls us to be. And so I would ask you, who do you need to forgive right now? We are called to be ministers of reconciliation, but let me understand this. Let me help you understand this. Forgiveness is a one-way street. Reconciliation is a two-way street. Sometimes people don't want to reconcile with you, but the first step to reconciliation is forgiveness. You can't reconcile while you're still holding bitterness in your heart. It's impossible. It will only burn a bridge. You have to forgive someone continuously, day in and day out, in order for there to be reconciliation. So forgiveness is your responsibility, and reconciliation is both people's responsibility. This is a passage that is calling you to forgive. There's never an excuse in the Bible that gives you an opportunity that says, well, I'm just not going to forgive that person. Never. Instead, over and over and over again, it says, as Christ has forgiven you, so you ought to forgive one another. In other words, where you find it hard to forgive, you have forgotten how much Jesus has forgiven you. So who do you need to forgive these days? All right, chapter 15, what must I do? I think it's this, right? Sometimes you flee to ensure cooler heads prevail. You take a break from an argument so that peace has a chance. Like, I don't know where you're at in your marriage, but some of us probably were told in premarital counseling, you never let the sun go down on your anger. Like, you never go to bed angry. I mean, sometimes a good night's rest is a good opportunity to just let your heart restart. And a good night's rest does the couple or whoever you're fighting with a whole lot better than continuing to fight on into the night. Not exactly what it's talking about there. And so I would just say, like, there are times where in order to give long-standing peace, restoration, shalom a chance, it might be time to flee your throne and flee your palace just as David did in order to preserve the relationship that he had with Absalom long term. Now, we're going to find out that didn't exactly work out, but David doesn't want to fight with his son. He would rather give up his kingdom in order to restore the relationship that he is losing. And I wonder what kingdom we're trying to preserve at the expense of relationship with others. All right, with that, I'm going to close out the video. I hope that this is helpful, and I hope that your groups are fruitful. Love you. See you soon.